All-out warfare in unforgiving terrain. Forest battles in eastern Ukraine mean facing a near-constant Russian onslaught. Vladimir Putin's army trying to break through Ukrainian defenses. Dmytro is one of those holding them up. The situation is very active and very tense, he says, because the enemy has much more equipment and manpower. Basically, every day they try to storm the positions. A dead Russian soldier and a destroyed tank show just how close the Russians have come. It's a fight for survival and against the elements. The trench, cold, wet, and soggy, the only heat coming from candles the soldiers cower around, gathering strength to face overwhelming Russian firepower. They shoot direct fire, planes are flying, basically they have it all, he says. But probably the worst are tanks. When they fire, you don't even hear it. You hear an airplane when it comes over. With a tank, you're in God's hands. Artillery fire, another threat here, as we found out when we came under fire trying to make it to the area.
Go! And this is unfortunately something that, when we work here in the east of the country, happens all too often. We were getting ready to film here, and then all of a sudden we heard what appeared to be outgoing artillery, but then a shell came in. 100 meters, gotcha. We're now trying to make our way out of here as safe as possible. That means we have to keep distance between our cars, but we also, of course, have to keep moving the entire time to make sure that we can get out of here, hopefully safely.
We believe a Russian drone spotted us and directed the artillery fire, but two can play that game. Naziri is a Ukrainian drone pilot. He guides Kiev's artillery guns, targeting Russian infantry, but also armored assault formations, including main battle tanks. He says ammo shortages mean he has to be extremely precise. It's no secret we're starved of artillery shells, he says. We try to work as efficiently and accurately as possible to hit the enemy's firepower, trying to fight back any way they can on one of the toughest battlefields of this war. For Pleitgen, CNN in eastern Ukraine. In 2024, Russia's war against Ukraine is as brutal as it ever has been. Both sides are still taking heavy casualties, and the battles are ferocious. The action has somewhat shifted, though, from the south of the country more towards the southeast and the east of the country. The Russians have unleashed another massive aerial campaign against sites here in Ukraine using drones, ballistic missiles, and also cruise missiles. The Ukrainians, though, now also fighting back, hitting some targets in Russia, like, for instance, the Belgorod region, where there have been some evacuations. Western military support for Ukraine will continue to be essential for the country, but it is far from a certain thing, especially aid from the United States, where U.S. Congress still has not okayed further military aid for Ukraine. There is the European Union, where a decision on further military aid was blocked by the Hungarians, so it's unclear when exactly that could come through, even though the countries themselves, the single countries, could continue to give Ukraine military aid and are continuing to do so. The Russians certainly seem to have replenished their ranks after taking heavy losses in 2023. The Russians also appear to have new tanks and armored vehicles. One of the other things that we're seeing is that the Russians are firing a lot of artillery on the front line, and a different picture for the Ukrainians. Especially ammunition is something that they're having a lot of trouble with. They certainly need those replenished. With Ukraine facing a Russian onslaught in many frontline areas, Kiev says continued U.S. military aid is more important than ever, Ukraine's military intel chief tells me.
Shells are one of the most decisive factors in this war. It's about quantity, not so much the quality as the quantity. Next, there are assault aircraft. These are aircraft of the type that the United States has, like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, and so on. This is what can really help inflict a military defeat.
But further military aid to Ukraine hangs in the balance, as Democrats accuse former President Trump of derailing a possible compromise. Budanov says he's not concerned about Trump.
He is an experienced person. He has fallen many times and gotten back up again. And this is a very serious trait. To say that he and the Republican Party are lovers of the Russian Federation is complete nonsense.
But the Russians are currently on the offensive. On the front lines, we've seen Kiev's forces suffering a severe lack of ammunition, struggling to hold the line.
Still, Budanov says he believes the tides will turn and Ukraine will attack.
На мою власну думку, основні події на
In my opinion, the main events on the battlefield will start happening sometime in the spring or early summer.
Vladimir Putin wants Kirilo Budanov dead. The Ukrainians say Moscow tried to assassinate him at least 10 times. Recently, Budanov's wife and several bodyguards fell ill after what Kiev says was poisoning by a, quote, heavy metal, but they survived. The Military Intelligence Directorate is said to be behind an increasing number of cross-border attacks targeting key infrastructure inside Russia and the occupied territories. While never claiming responsibility, Budanov tells me Russians can rest assured the war has come to them.
Я так
I believe that
думаю,
the
що в
plan
цьому
includes
плані
all major critical infrastructure
цей план
facilities
занесені
and military
всі
infrastructure
основні
facilities of
об'єкти
the Russian
критичної
Federation.
інфраструктури.
With Ukraine's offensive essentially stagnant, the Kremlin is currently feasting on rumors Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is close to firing his top general Valery Zaluzhny and possibly installing Budanov as his successor. The spy chief coy.
Isn't that something that weakens the country if it appears as though the president and his top general are not on the same page?
Знаєте, я
I am also the head of one of the military agencies. I personally have no conflict with anyone.
You know, people were talking about you possibly being the new general.
Давайте так, ви ж
If I was
зараз
appointed yesterday,
спілкуєтесь
would we
в
be
моїй
meeting?
організації.
Fred Pleitgen, CNN, Kiev.
The Air Force is certainly one of the big priority for the Ukrainians. It has been depleted in the past 2 years since this war has been raging. The Ukrainians, of course, to begin with, only had very old planes that they were using against more modern Russian planes. So the Air Force definitely a big priority for them, not just in terms of the jets that the Ukrainians say they need, but also in terms of the missiles that they want to fire. At the same time, the Ukrainians basically need everything else as well: tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, to be able to be on par with the Russians. Right now, there certainly is a deficit. And last but not least, for the Ukrainians, it also seems very important that they bring more people onto the battlefield. One of the things the Ukrainians have been talking about is further mobilization. In fact, Ukraine's top general is saying he needs about 500,000 more soldiers on the ground.